Okay, today we are going to learn about 30, 60, 90 triangles, which is another type of special right triangles. In the last lesson, we had 45, 45, 90 triangles. It's kind of a similar thing. We've got some shortcuts for these. We're actually going to start by explaining some of the information that we know and how these ratios come about. So we're starting with an equilateral triangle. All of the sides are the same, and we're going to use 2 for all of these sides because that's going to make the math easy here in a second. Now, when we look at equilateral triangles, all of the angles have to add up to 180. So if you take 180 and divide by 3, you would see that all of the angles are 60 degrees. So I'm going to put 60 here and 60 here. And I'm not going to mark the one at the top yet because what I'm going to do next is break this in half. And this is where we will get our right triangles from. So up here, the whole thing is 60, so if I break that in half, we would get 30 and 30. And also if we break this bottom side in half, we would get 1 and 1 for the sides. And so that's where we're going to get the 30, 60, 90 triangles. So what we see so far, if I just kind of cover up the left-hand side, is I have 30 and 60 and 90 for my angles. My shorter leg is 1 and my hypotenuse is 2 just by the nature of how we set this up. So that gives us one of the ratios that we're going to use. The shorter leg is half as long as the hypotenuse. And so that's where we're going to start in the next slide. So going over to the next little box, we know that the ratio of the sides is going to be 1 for the short leg and 2 for the hypotenuse. So we can figure out what this longer leg is by using Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to do 1 squared plus b squared equals 2 squared. Just a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You guys have been doing this for a long time. So it'd be 1 plus b squared equals 4. So if we're solving for b, I've got to get the b squared by itself. So we subtract 1 from each side. You get b squared equals 3. To get rid of the squared, we square root both sides. We end up with b being the square root of 3. So this side over here is the square root of 3. So when I talk about these, I'm going to call this the short leg. It is the shortest side on the triangle. This one I'm going to call the long leg. The legs are the 2 sides that make up the right angle, if you remember your vocabulary from previous years. And then the 2 is the hypotenuse. And so if I were to resize this triangle, keeping it a 30, 60, 90, but making the sides larger, no matter how big I make it or how small I make it, the sides will always have this proportionality. They'll always have these ratios among themselves. The hypotenuse is always twice as big as the short leg. The long leg is actually always square root of 3 times the short leg. And so we'll talk about that a little bit on the next box, the next slide, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so on the next triangle, we're going to mark the sides generically using x's. So I'm going to put x for the short leg, x square root of 3 for the long leg, and then 2x for the hypotenuse. Okay? And when we're solving these, there's a general rule that you always want to find the short leg first because everything hinges from the shortest side. So our ratio, if I do, let's say 2, the shortest side would be 2, the longer leg would be 2 square root of 3, and the hypotenuse is 2 times the shorter leg, which would be 4. If I used 5 for my shortest side, that'd be my short leg. The long leg would be 5 square root of 3, and the hypotenuse would be 5 times 2, which is 10. If I did 7, I'd have 7 square root of 3. 7 times 2 is 14. If I did 9, I would have 9 square root of 3 and 18. So these ratios hold no matter what I do to the sides. So this is the short leg, that's the shortest side on the triangle. This is the longer leg, which is sort of the medium length side. And then the hypotenuse is always the longest side. And it is always twice as big as the short leg. All right, so we're going to look at some examples. We're going to start with some easy ones where they give us two sides, and then we'll go on to the tougher ones where they only give us one side. Okay, so on our first triangle, on number 1, we just need to figure out what we have and what we're looking for. So the short leg is 7, and the short leg is always across from the 30-degree angle. That's the smallest angle. X is the long leg. It's across from the 60, and that's the one we're looking for. And we know that the hypotenuse is 14. And somehow my little right angle marks disappeared when I copied this, so I think they were a different color. The copier didn't like it, so we're going to put that on there. All right, so we always have to find the short leg first. Fortunately for us, we know the short leg is 7. So this side over here is just going to be 7 square root of 3. That's the only side that we're missing. So you just take the short leg, slap a square root of 3 on it, and that's it. Now we're going to go down to number 2 next. 8 is my hypotenuse. This is my right angle that should be marked here. 4 is the short leg. It's across from the 30. And again, we're looking for the longer leg. So you always go from the shorter leg to the longer leg and just put a square root of 3 on it, and that's it. So if you have the short leg, you need the long leg. You take it times the square root of 3. And if they're whole numbers, that's easy. You just put a square root of 3 on it. Okay, if we go over to number 3, they have given us 10 as the hypotenuse, and they've given us 5 square root of 3 as the longer leg, and we're looking for the short leg. So since we have both of these sides, we could use a lot of different information. We know that this short leg is half as long as the hypotenuse, and we know that this side is the short leg times the square root of 3, and you could use either one of those, and this side's going to come out to be 5. Take 10 divided by 2, you get 5, or you take the square root of 3 off of this, divide that off, you get 5 either way. Okay, number 4 is a little different. We have 6 as the short leg, 6 square root of 3 is the long leg. My right angle marks, again, are missing off these. Sorry, I'll put those back in. And we're looking for the hypotenuse. So remember that the hypotenuse is always twice as big as the short leg. So we're going to take 6 times 2, and the hypotenuse ends up being 12. And if I only had this side, I could just take the 6 off, because I know that that would be the short leg, and then I could take it times 2 to get the 12. But those are pretty easy. We had 2 pieces of information. Normally, though, they are not going to give us 2 pieces of information. They're usually going to give us 1, which makes this a little bit tougher. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the more bizarre examples. So down here, if I look at what we have, I am given the longer leg. This is the long leg. Okay? We need the short leg, and we need the hypotenuse. You have to find the short leg first. There's really no other way to do this. So to find the short leg, what we would do is we'd take 10 and divide by 2. So I know that this side over here is 5. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I did that wrong. That is not correct, because this is not the hypotenuse. So what we have to do to go from the long leg to the short leg is divide by the square root of 3. So V would be 10 divided by the square root of 3. Sorry, I was thinking we had the hypotenuse, but we don't. Try to erase that. So we're going to take 10 times the square root of 3 to get this side. And remember, we can't leave the radical in the denominator, so we're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 3. So you get 10 square root of 3 over 3 for this side. So this side is 10 square root of 3 over 3. And then we know that the short leg times 2 gives us the hypotenuse. And so what we would do with this is take it times 2. So to get U, I would take 10 square root of 3 over 3 and multiply it by 2. And since I need it to be a fraction, I'm going to make it 2 over 1, which gives me 20 square root of 3 over 3. That is just a really weird number, but that's what you have to do. So if you're going from the long leg to the short leg, you divide by the square root of 3. And then to get the hypotenuse, you go from short leg to hypotenuse by multiplying by 2. That's probably one of the hardest types of problems you're going to see. The next one's not quite so bad, but it has a fraction in it. So on this one, they have given us the short leg. So to get to the longer leg, you put it with a square root of 3. So you could do 9/2 and a square root of 3 like this. The other way you could do it is 9 square root of 3 over 2. Either way is good. You're just going to take it times the square root of 3, which basically puts a square root of 3 in there. And then to get to the hypotenuse, we have to double it. So I would take 9/2 and multiply it by 2, which would be 2 over 1, which would cancel this, which means that m is going to be 9. Okay, so kind of weird. If we go over to the next example, we have the hypotenuse is 2 square root of 3. We're used to seeing that square root of 3 on the long leg, but that isn't the long leg. You always want to go back to the short leg first. So basically we take, I'm going to label this. Hang on. So the short leg, y, is 2 times the square root of 3. And then we'd have to go backwards, we'd divide by the square root of 3, which means, sorry, that's wrong too. Sorry guys, this whole recording thing is messing me up. So we're going from the hypotenuse to this, we just need to divide by 2. 2 square root of 3, we need to divide by 2. Basically, that'll take the 2's off, and this side will be square root of 3. And then to get the long leg, so you have to go from the short leg to the long leg, for x, you would take the short leg, which is square root of 3, and multiply it by the square root of 3, which would give you 3 over here. So when they start off with radicals and fractions, they look really weird. And if you're like, I have no idea why she's doing what she's doing, I'm going to give you sort of a step-by-step here in a second. So just hang on for that. If we go on to this last example, they have given us the hypotenuse. So you always want to find the short leg first. So to go from the hypotenuse to the short leg, basically you just divide by 2 because it's half as big. So that's going to be square root of 5 over 2. We're just going to leave that because that's our radical form. So this is square root of 5 over 2. And then to go from the short leg to the long leg, you always multiply by the square root of 3. So square root of 5 over 2 times the square root of 3. And make that into a fraction just to make this easy. And you get square root of 15 over 2 for this side. Okay, I think these are really confusing when they have the fractions and the radicals and they only give us one side. So if you have room at the bottom of your page, or you could put this at the top of your practice page, I'm going to give you some simple step-by-step information. I'm just going to write it on the bottom of this paper that I'm working on right now. So if you are given the short leg, you multiply by 2 to get the hypotenuse. Okay? If you have the short leg, you multiply by the square root of 3 to get the long leg. If they give you the hypotenuse, you would divide by 2 to get the short leg first, and then you would take the short leg times the square root of 3 to get the long leg. You would have to go in that order. So if they give you the hypotenuse, that's what you would do. Okay, so give you a second to kind of process that, write that down. This is important information to help you. And I'm going to give you one more scenario here in just a second, but I have to scoop my papers, so I'm going to wait. All right, if you need more time, pause the video. I'm going to scoot this over and talk about what if they give you the long leg. So if they give you the long leg, you're going to divide by the square root of 3 to get the short leg, and then you're going to use the short leg and multiply by 2 to get the hypotenuse. You'd have to go in that order. This would be step 1. That would be step 2. So if you use that, and you use those mad radical skills that we've been working on for 2 years, you'll be okay. These are a little confusing. Just do your best. That is the end of the video.